Before we begin, I'd like to ask you for a small favor. I'm working really hard to reach my goal of 1,000 subscribers. It's a truly important milestone for me. Please click the subscribe button on the channel. It's just one click, but it gives me massive motivation to keep making more videos. Thank you all so much. Tell her the truth, Tomasz, or I will. Karolina's words dropped onto the table like a heavy stone. The restaurant, moments before buzzing with clinking glasses and conversation, fell eerily silent. Heads turned at neighboring tables. Alicja slowly put down her fork, her gaze fixed on her husband, as if waiting for someone to announce it was a bad joke, a failed prank, a hidden camera show scene. But Tomasz didn't look like he was joking. He sat rigidly, his hands clasped on the table, avoiding her eyes. Karolina sat beside him, young, tall, her hair perfectly styled, a costly coat draped over her chair. She looked like someone who had just won something precious, perhaps even someone who had just won a life. This story is crafted especially for the Opowieści Spod Serca channel. Every word, every sound, flows from emotion and real experience. Sit back, get comfortable, and let this tale touch your heart. Alicja slowly raised her eyes. What truth? She asked calmly. Tomasz finally looked at her. There was no shame in his eyes, only weariness. And something else? A flicker of relief. Alicja, he began. Karolina sighed theatrically. Oh, Tomasz, are we really going to drag this out? Alicja felt a chill trace its way down her spine, not from jealousy, but because she was beginning to understand. Speak, she said. Tomasz cleared his throat. I met Karolina 6 months ago. At a nearby table, a conversation died down. A waiter, carrying a tray of wine, slowed his steps. Alicja didn't look away. And we've been together. Silence hung in the air. Not a normal silence, but a heavy, dense one, as if all the lights in the room had suddenly been extinguished. Alicja leaned back in her chair. For 6 months, she repeated. Yes, Karolina leaned forward slightly. Tomasz didn't want to hurt you, she said, though there wasn't a shred of sympathy in her voice. He just didn't know how to say it. Alicja looked at her for the first time, truly looked. She was younger, maybe 10 years, maybe 15. A face without wrinkles, perfect makeup. The confidence of someone who believes the world has just opened its doors to them. Alicja suddenly thought Karolina looked like someone who had won a contest. The prize, someone else's husband. I understand, she said calmly. Karolina raised an eyebrow. Really? Tomasz furrowed his brow. Alicja, so you've been seeing each other for 6 months, and today you decided to tell me over dinner? Karolina shrugged. Tomasz thought it would be more honest. Alicja let out a short, sharp laugh. Honest. The word sounded strange, like something pulled from a completely different story. Tomasz ran a hand across the table. I didn't want to make a scene at home, so you're making it in a restaurant, Alicja. Fine, she said, and that single word stopped everything. Tomasz looked at her, bewildered. Karolina's eyes narrowed slightly. Fine, she repeated. Alicja nodded. Since you're together, you must have a plan. Tomasz took a deeper breath. I want to move out. Karolina smiled faintly. We thought that was the best solution. Alicja looked at her husband. 20 years. 20 years of shared life flashed through her mind, like a fast-forwarded film. Their first apartment. Old sofas bought on installments. Arguments over bills. His first business. The hours he came home tired and angry. And me. Always somewhere in the background. Quiet. Calm. Fixing things that broke. Alicja suddenly felt something strange. Not anger, not jealousy, Something far more unexpected. Relief. "I understand," she said. Karolina bowed her head. "Are you really that calm?" Alicja looked at her. "And how should I be?" "Well," Karolina smiled wryly, "most women make a scene." Alicja was silent for a moment, then took a sip of water. "Most women fight for what they want to keep." Karolina crossed her arms. "And you don't want to?" Tomasz tensed in his chair. "Karolina." But Alicja was already looking at him, long and hard, as if seeing him for the first time in a very long time. "Tomasz," she said calmly, "do you really want to leave?" He hesitated. Karolina immediately chimed in, "Of course he does." Tomasz looked at her, then back at Alicja. "Yes," he finally said. Alicja nodded, and then something happened that none of them expected. She smiled. Not broadly, not triumphantly, just faintly. "In that case, take him." Karolina frowned. "Excuse me?" "If you think this is a prize," Alicja said calmly, "you can have him." Tomasz stared at her, as if she'd just spoken a foreign language. "Alicja, you don't have to." "Oh, but I do," she interrupted him gently. Karolina tilted her head. "Is this some kind of game?" "No." Alicja looked her straight in the eyes. "It's a decision." For a moment, no one spoke. A waiter approached the table hesitantly. "Is everything all right?" Alicja smiled politely at him. "Yes, just the bill, please." Tomasz stared at her, dumbfounded. "Alicja, but what? I thought you'd be furious." "I was. A long time ago." Karolina leaned back in her chair. "This is a bit strange," she said. "What?" "That you're giving your husband away so easily." Alicja picked up her purse from the back of her chair. "You know," she said, calmly, "sometimes you give something away, not because you're losing." Karolina smiled faintly. "And why?" Alicja looked at Tomasz, then back at Karolina, and said the sentence that would echo in their minds for a long time to come, because finally, someone else had agreed to take it on. Karolina frowned. "I don't understand." Alicja stood up from the table. "You'll understand sooner than you think." Tomasz watched as she put on her coat. "Where are you going?" Alicja looked at him calmly. "Home. Our home." Alicja was silent for a moment, then replied quietly, "Not anymore," and she walked out of the restaurant. The door closed behind her with a soft click. Only silence remained at the table. Karolina looked at Tomasz. That was easy. Tomasz, however, didn't look like a winner. He stared at the door for a long time, as if only now beginning to wonder if Alicja had just lost, or perhaps just won something far greater. "See, I told you it would be calm," Karolina said, closing the apartment door with a triumphant smile and leaning against the wall. Tomasz still stood in the entryway, a travel bag in his hand. For a moment, he looked unsure if he should really be there. "Calm," he repeated. "Well, you saw," Karolina said. "No scene, no tears. I thought your wife would put on a bigger drama." Tomasz slowly took off his jacket. "Alicja never makes scenes." Karolina snorted. "Maybe that's why you got bored?" Without waiting for a reply, she walked to the window and drew back the curtains. The evening city lights reflected in the glass. The apartment was modern, bright, smelling of freshness and expensive scented candles. It was different from the home Tomasz had lived in for the last 20 years. There were no traces of everyday life here, no old photos, no bookshelves, no quiet evidence of a life lived. Karolina turned to him with a smile. "Welcome to your new chapter." Tomasz placed the bag by the wall. "That sounds strange." "Because you're still used to the old one, to the old life," she corrected him. Karolina stepped closer, and put her arms around his neck, pulling him towards her and kissing him. Now everything will be different. Tomasz returned the kiss, but there was a hint of uncertainty in his movements. Karolina didn't notice, or didn't want to. The first few days were almost like a vacation. Karolina took him to new restaurants Alicja had never liked. They ordered expensive wine, laughed loudly, and Tomasz told stories from work. Karolina listened with shining eyes. "I can't believe you lasted with her all these years," she said one evening. "With whom?" "With Alicja." Tomasz shrugged. "One gets used to things." "To what?" "To everything." Karolina shook her head. "I wouldn't be able to live so calmly." "Calmly?" "Well, you know, without ambition, without emotion." Tomasz was silent for a moment. Alicja had ambition. What kind? Just different kinds. Karolina took a sip of wine. She didn't look like someone changing the world. "Not everyone has to change the world," Tomasz said. Karolina smiled faintly. "I prefer people who try." A week later, Tomasz started leaving more things in the apartment. First a shirt, then his laptop, then a few pairs of shoes. Karolina arranged everything to her liking. Minimalist, modern. "Your old jackets are a bit old-fashioned," she said one day. "I like them. Maybe. But they look like they're from the previous era." Tomasz looked at himself in the mirror. "Alicja bought most of my clothes." Karolina winced. "It shows." The next day, she took him shopping. "New shirts, new shoes, a new coat. Now you look like a successful man," she said with satisfaction. "And before? Before you looked like an accountant's husband." Tomasz smiled wryly. Alicja was an architect. Karolina waved her hand. "You know what I mean." For the first few weeks, Tomasz was in good spirits. There was no tension, no long conversations about bills, no silences at dinner. Karolina was energetic, loud, full of ideas. "We should go somewhere for the weekend," she said one day. "Where?" "Milan." "For the weekend? Why not?" Tomasz laughed. "Alicja always said that was pointless." "Exactly. That's why I'm better," Karolina said triumphantly. One evening, they were sitting on the sofa. Karolina was scrolling through her phone. "Was your wife always this calm?" "Yes." "Didn't she get jealous?" "Not really." Karolina's eyes narrowed. "That's a bit strange." "Why?" "Because I would be jealous." "Of what?" "Of everything." Tomasz shrugged. Alicja wasn't like that. Karolina looked at him with curiosity. "And what was she like?" Tomasz was silent for a moment. "Quiet, I know that. And patient." Karolina snorted with laughter. "So boring." Tomasz didn't answer. A few days later, Tomasz came home late from work, tired, took off his shoes, and sat on the sofa. "What's for dinner?" he asked. Karolina looked up from her laptop. "I didn't make anything." "Nothing? We'll order something." Tomasz sighed. "You could have made pasta." "I'm not your cook," she said lightly. "That's not what I meant." "Then what?" "I'm just asking." Karolina closed her laptop. "Tomasz, we're adults. We're not going to play the 90s. "What 90s?" "The woman in the kitchen, the man at the table." Tomasz looked at her, tired. "Alicja also worked, but she cooked, right?" Tomasz didn't answer. Karolina shrugged. "See." The first small argument occurred a week later. "How much did you pay for that watch?" Karolina asked. 4,000. 4,000 is absurd. Why? Because you can buy the same one for 1,000. Not the same. Almost the same. Tomasz put his keys on the table. "I don't like cheap things." Karolina looked at him intently. "Do you always have to be right?" "No. Because it sounds like you have to be. Tomasz furrowed his brow. What are you talking about? Nothing. I'm just asking. Karolina stood up. That evening, she sat in the bedroom for a long time with her phone. She texted a friend, I think I'm starting to understand his wife. A moment later, she received a reply. Why? Karolina glanced towards the living room, where Tomasz was watching the news. Then she texted, because life with him is a bit intense. Her phone vibrated again. But you wanted him. Karolina stared at the screen for a moment, then replied, Yes, but I thought I knew the demo version. In the living room, Tomasz turned up the TV volume. Karolina, what? Where's the decoder remote? Karolina sighed. It's not on the table. Then look for it. I always put it there. Well, not today. A moment later, Tomasz entered the bedroom. Why do you always move everything? Karolina looked at him, surprised. The remote? Yes, Tomasz. It's just a remote. He looked at her for a moment longer, then turned and left. Karolina sank back onto the pillow. For the first time in many weeks, she thought of Alicja and remembered her calm smile in the restaurant and the sentence that had seemed strange then. If you think it's a prize, you can have him. Karolina closed her eyes, and for the first time, a thought she had previously dismissed flickered through her mind. Perhaps Alicja wasn't calm because she had lost. Perhaps she was calm because she had long understood something that Karolina was only beginning to learn. Why is the coffee cold again? Tomasz's voice sliced through the kitchen silence like a blade. Karolina looked up from her phone, meeting his gaze for a moment, speechless. I made it 10 minutes ago, she replied calmly. Exactly, he grumbled. 10 minutes ago. He placed the mug on the counter, a little harder than necessary. I like it hot. Karolina put her phone down. Tomasz, it's coffee. I know. You can warm it up. That's not the point. Silence descended. Tomasz opened the refrigerator and stared inside for a moment, as if searching for something that might lift his spirits. There's nothing to eat, he said. There's a salad. A salad isn't food. It's rabbit food. Karolina felt a familiar tension rising in her throat. Couldn't you cook something yourself? Tomasz closed the fridge. I get home from work at 7 p.m. I work too. I know. He looked at her. It used to work somehow. Karolina frowned. Used to? When? Tomasz was silent for a moment. Then he uttered a single word. With Alicja. The sentence hung in the air like a heavy cloud. Karolina felt a prickle of irritation. Well, maybe you should go back to Alicja then. Don't exaggerate. I'm not exaggerating. Tomasz turned and poured himself some water. I'm just saying she knew how to organize the house better. Karolina let out a short laugh. Of course. What? Nothing. Just say it. It's just strange that she was so upset if she did everything better. Tomasz didn't reply. A few weeks earlier, Karolina had been convinced she was starting an exciting new life. Now she was beginning to understand that excitement lasted only a moment. Then came the everyday, and the everyday with Tomasz was demanding. Very demanding. It started with small things. A mug in the wrong place. A towel hung incorrectly. The TV remote elsewhere. Why do you change everything? Tomasz would ask. Because I live here. But I live here too. Exactly. Karolina found herself explaining things that had once seemed obvious, more and more often. One evening, Tomasz sat at the table with his laptop. How much did you pay for electricity? He asked. I don't know. I haven't checked yet. How have you not checked? The bill just came. I'll check it tomorrow. Tomasz looked at her with disapproval. Alicja always paid bills immediately. Karolina closed her eyes. Tomasz, what? Are we really talking about your ex-wife with every bill? No. It sounds like it. Tomasz sighed. She was just more organized. Karolina stood up from the table. Maybe because she lived with you for 20 years. Tomasz looked up. What's that supposed to mean? That some things can only be endured after long training. The worst, however, were his outbursts. They weren't loud, they weren't spectacular. They were brief, sharp, like a sudden blast of cold air. One day, Karolina returned home, half an hour later than usual. Where were you? Tomasz asked from the doorway. At the store. Why didn't you text? Because I was buying vegetables. You could have texted, Tomasz. It was 30 minutes. I don't like it when I don't know where you are. Karolina looked at him, bewildered. We're not in high school. That's not the point. What is it then? Tomasz was silent. Then he said softly, respect. Karolina felt something inside her snap. Respect? Yes. So a lack of a text message is a lack of respect. Don't twist my words. Karolina leaned her shopping bag against the counter. You know what's interesting? What? That when we met 6 months ago, you were completely different. Tomasz looked at her coldly. People are different in different situations. So now I'm seeing the real Tomasz. A few days later, Karolina sat in a cafe with her friend Marta. So how's your great love? Marta asked. Karolina smiled faintly. Intense. Very intense. Marta raised an eyebrow. That sounds like a warning. Karolina shrugged. He just has a strong personality. And you? I do too. So you must have a lively time. Karolina was silent for a moment, then said quietly, You know, sometimes I think about Alicja. Marta frowned. His ex-wife. She was so calm, and now I'm starting to wonder why. Marta tilted her head, because she was tired. Karolina sighed. Possibly. That evening, Tomasz returned from work in a bad mood. The project was delayed again. That's probably not normal, Tomasz, he said, tossing his keys on the table. If people did what they were supposed to do, everything would work faster. Karolina sat on the sofa. Maybe they're tired. That's not an excuse. Sometimes it is. Tomasz looked at her sharply. You always defend everyone but me. What? I've noticed that. Tomasz? That's absurd. Really? Karolina was silent. Tomasz paced the room. You know what the problem is? What? People stop trying. Maybe they're just fed up? With what? Karolina looked at him for a long time. With constantly being not enough. Tomasz stopped. What are you talking about? Nothing. That night, she couldn't sleep for a long time. Tomasz was already asleep. He breathed calmly, as if nothing had happened. Karolina lay in the darkness, staring at the ceiling. In her mind, she still heard Alicya's sentence. If you think it's a prize, you can have him. It had seemed strange then. Now, it was beginning to sound like a warning. Karolina turned onto her side. She looked at Tomasz. For a moment, she contemplated something she wouldn't have been able to imagine even a month ago. Perhaps Alicja hadn't given up her husband because she was weak. Perhaps she had given him up because she was tired of fighting. And only now was Karolina beginning to understand what a real life with Tomasz was like. It wasn't romantic. It wasn't exciting. It was hard, sometimes suffocating. And more often, Karolina found herself entertaining a thought she had previously dismissed. Perhaps Alicja hadn't lost it all. Perhaps she had simply stepped off a train heading in the wrong direction. Alicja, the voice was uncertain. Karolina stood by the counter in a small cafe on the corner. For a moment, she herself wasn't sure if she really wanted to speak the name aloud. The woman by the window slowly looked up. It was her, Alicja. She sat at a table with a cup of coffee and a notebook, wearing a light coat, her hair tied in a simple bun. She looked calm, almost light. Karolina felt a strange pang in her stomach. She hadn't seen her since that dinner at the restaurant, since the day everything began. Or perhaps, she suddenly thought, when everything ended. Alicja looked at her for a moment, as if trying to place her. Then she smiled faintly. Karolina. There was neither coldness nor irony in her voice. That surprised Karolina the most.
May I?
Karolina gestured to the chair at her table. Of course, Alicja said. Karolina sat down. They were both silent for a moment. A waitress brought coffee. Cappuccino, Karolina said softly. Still the same? Alicja asked. Karolina looked at her, surprised. How do you know? Alicja shrugged. Tomasz always ordered one for you. The sentence hung in the air. Karolina felt a slight tension. He talked about me a lot. A little. What exactly? Alicja stirred her coffee with a spoon for a moment. That you're energetic. That's true. And that you like spontaneous things. Karolina smiled. I still do. Alicja looked at her intently. And how is it now? Karolina didn't answer immediately. Instead, she looked out the window. On the street, people passed each other, each absorbed in their own lives. Different, she said finally. Different. Yes. Alicja nodded, as if she had just heard something she expected. Karolina suddenly felt the urge to say more. You know, she began, I've been thinking about you. Alicja raised her eyebrows. About me? Yes. It's a rare hobby. Karolina laughed nervously. It's not about a hobby. What is it about? Karolina took a sip of her coffee. It was hot. About that evening at the restaurant. Yes. Alicja nodded. You were very calm. I was tired. Karolina looked at her intently. Now I'm starting to understand why. Alicja didn't answer immediately. She looked at Karolina calmly, like a doctor listening to a patient. How is it with Tomasz? She asked finally. Karolina smiled wryly. Intense. Alicja gave a quiet snort of laughter. That's a good word. A very good one. They were silent for a moment. He works a lot, Karolina said. He always worked. And everything has to be his way. It was always like that. Karolina looked at her in disbelief. And you put up with him for 20 years? Alicja shrugged. One gets used to it. Karolina smiled. He said the exact same thing. Alicja tilted her head slightly. He really did. That means nothing has changed. Karolina suddenly felt something strange. It wasn't jealousy. It wasn't hostility, but rather something akin to solidarity. He often mentions you, she said. Alicja looked at her calmly. He really does. In what way? Karolina shrugged. That you were more organized. That sounds like a compliment. And that you did everything better. Alicja laughed softly. That already sounds like nostalgia. Karolina suddenly said something she hadn't planned at all. Sometimes I feel like he's constantly dissatisfied. Alicja looked at her for a moment, then said, Calm down, because there's Karolina. She blinked. Just like that? Just like that. He was always like that. Almost always. Karolina pushed her cup away. And why did you stay? Alicja looked out the window for a moment. Because I believed it could be fixed. And for a while, it even worked. Then Alicja looked at her with a slight smile. Then one starts to realize that not everything can be changed. Karolina was silent. A memory suddenly surfaced in her mind. The TV remote. Cold coffee. A text message asking, Where are you? Small things. Everyday things. Yet heavy. You know what's the strangest thing? Karolina said suddenly. What? That I really thought I had won. Alicja didn't reply. Karolina looked at her seriously. I thought I had taken your husband. Alicja smiled slightly. Taking people doesn't work like taking suitcases. I know that now. You learn quickly. Karolina sighed. I should have listened to what you said back then. What did I say? If you think it's a prize, you can have him. Alicja looked at her calmly. It was the truth. Karolina shook her head. Back then, I thought you were proud. I was, really. Of what? Alicja smiled slightly. Of not having to pretend anymore. They sat in silence for a moment. Then Karolina said even more quietly, Now I'm starting to understand. Alicja tilted her head. Understand what exactly? Karolina looked her straight in the eye. Why you were so calm? Alicja raised her eyebrows. Why? Karolina hesitated. Then she said slowly, because you don't fight for something that's destroying you. Alicja looked at her for a moment, then smiled wider. Exactly. Karolina lowered her gaze. It's just a shame I only understood it now. Alicja finished her coffee. Everyone understands in their own time. Karolina looked at her one last time, and for the first time, saw her truly. Not as a defeated wife, not as the woman she had replaced, but as someone who had exited this story earlier, and perhaps more wisely. As Karolina left the cafe, she turned back one last time. Alicja sat at her table, writing in her notebook again, calm, like someone who had long since closed a chapter of her life. Karolina stepped out onto the street. The air was cool. For a moment, she stood still, and for the first time, she thought something she couldn't have admitted, even to herself before. Perhaps Alicja wasn't the woman she had defeated. Perhaps she was the woman who had simply gotten out of the game earlier. You're going out again? Tomasz's voice was cold. Karolina stood by the door, fastening her coat. She glanced at him over her shoulder. Yes. Where to? For a walk. At 10 p.m. Karolina sighed. Tomasz, it's just a walk. You could have said so earlier. I'm saying it now. Tomasz got up from the sofa. I don't like these things. What things? That you suddenly go out. Karolina looked at him in silence for a moment. A few months ago, his tone would have affected her. The realization, however, began to stir a different emotion in her. Weariness. Karolina, Tomasz said calmly, I'm not your employee. I didn't say you were, but you're acting like you're trying to control me. Tomasz crossed his arms. Am I overreacting? Karolina looked at him intently. Am I really overreacting? Tomasz didn't answer immediately. Silence settled in the room. The television in the background mumbled something about the news, but neither of them was listening. You've changed, Tomasz finally said. Karolina offered a faint smile. Maybe I've just started to see more. What does that mean? It means I'm starting to understand Alicja. The name hit Tomasz like a splash of cold water. Alicja, again. Yes, we're not together anymore. I know, so stop talking about her. Karolina met his gaze. It's hard not to talk about someone who endured for 20 years what I'm only just beginning to experience. Tomasz frowned. What do you mean? Karolina paused for a moment. Then, she said calmly, You. This wasn't their first serious conversation, but it was the first in which Karolina didn't try to smooth over the tension. Tomasz stared at her. Disbelief etched on his face. Are you saying I'm the problem? No. Then what are you saying? Karolina took off her coat and hung it back on the rack. I'm saying that living with you is very difficult for you. Perhaps for anyone. Tomasz let out a short, humorless laugh. Alicja didn't think so. Karolina looked at him, her expression serious. You weren't privy to our conversations, but I witnessed her silence, and now I understand what it meant. Tomasz fell silent. Weeks passed. The atmosphere in the apartment grew increasingly heavy. More arguments, more silences, more evenings spent with each of them in a different room. One day, Karolina came home early from work. Tomasz was sitting at the table in the living room, his laptop open. We need to talk, she said. Tomasz sighed again. Yes. He closed the laptop. All right. Karolina sat down opposite him. For a moment, she looked down at her hands. Do you remember the day you told Alicja you were leaving? Yes. I thought I had won then. Tomasz frowned. Won what? You. Tomasz offered a slight smile. And then? Karolina looked up. Now I understand it wasn't a victory. What do you mean? It means I took on something she was already tired of carrying. Tomasz stood up from his chair. That's absurd. Is it? Yes, Tomasz. Karolina looked at him calmly. I'm leaving. The silence was almost palpable. What did you say? Tomasz asked. I'm leaving. Where to? It doesn't matter. Of course it matters. Karolina stood up. I don't want to live like this anymore. Like this. In tension. In constant reproach. Tomasz looked at her with disbelief. You think life is perfect? No. Exactly. But it doesn't have to be a constant battle. No one is fighting. Karolina looked at him sadly. Tomasz, you fight with everything. With people, with situations, with reality, and sometimes even with the air. Tomasz remained silent. I don't want to be your opponent, Karolina said. You never were. In your mind, everyone is. That evening, she packed a few things. There was no dramatic scene, no shouting. Tomasz sat in the living room, staring out the window. Is this because of Alicja? He asked at one point. Karolina paused at the door. No. Because of what? Because of the truth. What truth? Karolina looked at him for a moment. Then she said calmly, that not everything we take from other people is good for us. Months later, Tomasz sat alone in a restaurant, the same one, at the same table. The waiter brought the bill. Alone today? Yes, it's been a while since I've seen you here. Tomasz nodded. The restaurant was noisy. People were laughing, talking, clinking glasses, and he sat alone, suddenly remembering that evening. Alicja, her calm smile, and the sentence that had seemed strange to him then. If you think it's a prize, you can have it. Now, he understood it better than ever. Meanwhile, Alicja sat in a small park near her new apartment, reading a book. The sun was slowly setting behind the trees. On the bench beside her lay a shopping bag, simple things, a peaceful life. Her phone vibrated. A message from Karolina. You were right. Alicja smiled faintly. She replied with a single sentence. Everyone arrives at the truth in their own time. Then, she put her phone away and returned to her book. Because sometimes, the greatest victory isn't winning a fight. Sometimes, the greatest victory is simply walking away. Sometimes, someone thinks they've won by taking another person. But life quickly reveals the truth. Not every relationship is a prize. Not every person is who they seem at first. And not every quiet woman is a loser. Sometimes, she was the strongest. If this story reminded you of anything, leave a comment. The truth always comes out. Because sometimes one story can say, thank you for listening to this story, created especially for the channel Tales from the Heart. If it touched your emotions, leave your mark, a comment, a subscription, or a thought, because that's how more stories are created.